you with his consistency. What Rob talked about, about Djokovic, Rob talked that it's really hard to make the highlights reels for Djokovic, and the same it was for Lendl. He just was kind of this consistent baseline player, and I'm pretty certain he would be great to make the team because he simply wouldn't go below some level. He also.
So would you consider him to be a team player?
Yes, actually, that's what I was going to talk about now. He immigrated. No worries. He immigrated into the US in '86, and he didn't play in team competitions anymore, as the government of Czechoslovakia called him an illegal defector. But he still managed to win both Davis Cup and the World Team Cup before that for his country. So he definitely shined in such events too. And I think he's a must-have for the European team. Also, 8 Grand Slams, so that's a very big number.
So, Rob, I happen to know, and so does Damien, when he was making that entire case, that you don't quite fancy Van Lendl quite so much.
I agree with everything that Damien said. On the face of it, everything makes sense. His record, and his training and everything makes sense to have him in the team. I'm just not sure how much he would enjoy it. And I think about him at the peak of his powers when he's winning the most of his titles was when he was isolating himself more away from the rest of the tour. And I think he kind of softened a bit towards the end of his career in terms of maybe, for want of a better way of saying it, being a more likable person on tour. So I don't know if he'd be up for it.
Interesting. Let's move on to a different. Let's just bring it to a different area. There's only 2 other European players that we've not discussed that are above or equal to Ivan Lendl in terms of Grand Slams won, and that's Bjorn Borg at 11 and Fred Perry at 8. And we talked about different eras. Obviously, Fred Perry is going back to the 1930s, and he won his 8 Grand Slams over 3 years. So can we just kind of almost rule him in or out at this stage? Is there any point in even going back to that stage? Did either of you pick Fred Perry?
No, I didn't. So no British bias there. I have got one. Go on.
Can we talk about Bjorn Borg for a minute then instead? Do both of you have Bjorn Borg in your team?
I did have him as my next selection.
You did have him. Damien, Why have you got Borg there?
Once again, a fantastic team player. I think his career is often undervalued just because how short it is. It was. He retired for the first time. He made that comeback that was just really not successful. But he retired when he was 26. He won 11 slams by just winning Wimbledon and the French Open. He only played the Australian Open once, which I think is just an incredible record. To win 11 slams by the age of 26. I'm not positive, but I don't think any of the big 3 did it, right? So he still has like the best Open era win-loss percentage. I think on any surface. He also won. He also won a lot of titles on indoors in his days. So he was going to be my next selection after Lendl.
I know that a lot of people kind of out there in the tennis world kind of get balked by the fact that Bjorn Borg isn't like in the discussion for the greatest player in the world as much as the likes of Federer and Djokovic and Nadal at the moment. Is that a view that you kind of subscribe to, Rob, or not?
I don't know. I actually haven't picked Bjorn Borg in my team, which I know is kind
of... You two are going to start fighting in a minute.
Kind of a sacrilegious thing to say. And it wasn't because... It wasn't because it hadn't crossed my mind. Of course it has. And obviously, he is team captain for Europe in the actual Laver Cup as well. I want to suggest a left field choice and my one pick for a non-Open era player. and this is purely on top of the list for most Davis Cup rubbers ever won. At 120 was Nicola Pietrangeli, and 78 of those in singles. So I think just from a stats, appealing to the data heads here from a stats point of view, this guy's won the most Davis Cup rubbers. What do you think of that, Damien?
Well, as I said, I mean, we don't really have much footage of him, but I certainly, of course, heard of the guy. One of the courts in Rome is named after him. I'm not too convinced he would do well on indoor surfaces, though. Like, I think he only won the French Open, right?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
Looking at it right now, I see he also never won the Davis Cup, actually. I'm not sure who were the other players in his era from Italy.
Well, this is where stats fall down, isn't it? Lies, damn lies, and statistics. I'm more than happy to swap Borg for Pietrangeli. Okay. It was a left field choice that I
actually wanted to give you, some sort of a compromise and say that we're taking Lendl, and then you have the pick for the next player, because I'm way more into Lendl than Borg here.
Hold on a minute. I can't. I just hold on.
Okay.
I know that I'm only the host here, and I don't necessarily have a say, but I'm also European, and I feel like if Bjorn Borg isn't selected for this team, then my mum will have a fit. Okay. So,
I'm gonna, at the risk of giving Andy's mum a fit, I'm gonna. If you're saying Lendl's a must-have, then I'm saying Murray's a must-have, and then that's our
okay.
That's our five.
Andy Murray. Okay. We'll talk. Can we talk about Andy Murray in relation to the sixth pick? Can I just have some sense? I don't want to cross too many streams here in a Ghostbusters reference, but Amy, have you heard this European discussion that's been going on here?
Yeah, I have, and I also heard the thing about Nadal, and I was like, wow, if they were almost not going to pick Nadal and they were almost not going to pick Borg, I think World may beat them in this.
Right, let's get some. So, having Lendl, are we having Borg as fifth, or are we going for Andy Murray as fifth?
No, let's go for Murray. Let's stick to our guns.
Okay, Andy Murray. I mean, obviously, I'm going to go along with that, but right, Andy Murray.
Maybe your mother will maybe your mother will forgive us because there's Murray.
Well, yeah, she does love Andy Murray. Anyway, that's enough mum talk on one podcast. She'll get in a big head. She's like my number one. She's the number one fan of this podcast. Let's go back to the rest of the world then. Like Amy, you mentioned that the rest of the world might beat this team if they're not going to pick Borg, and they haven't picked him so far. So, okay. What do you think of the depth in your side? Is it lacking compared to the European side?
I mean, it's interesting to me that Ryan had his picks, and then he has like this whole other sort of backup pool, because to me, the top 9 were very easy, and then there was a cutoff, and it was like, wow, this is easy. I just filled it right out. Do you want to hear my next, or is that?
I would love to hear who you've got kind of like jostling for those top couple of positions. Obviously, you had Roy Emerson in your top 3. So who else? And you had Laver. So we know kind of 4 of your 6. So let's just see who your kind of 5 and 6 were.
Okay, Agassi, and Connors were my next 2.
Yeah, go ahead.
Both with 8 Grand Slams. Agassi with the career slams, won them all once, at least once. Team player, a guy who would not quit ever. I don't care if he was on his last leg. Entertaining, the crowd loves him. He almost made my top 3 locks. And then the same for Connors. He didn't play in the same era as Agassi, but the longevity.
He tried to, though, didn't he? He went that long.
Yeah. the ability to the all-court game, the ability to come back when the chips are down. So those were my next two.
Ryan?
So actually, those were my next two as well, which I think speaks to what Amy was saying, where the depth may not be there if they were, say, a dozen players, but I think picking a top six, it is similar. Yeah, I had Agassi. I mean, Agassi and Connors both had 17 Masters. I think when Connors played, it was the Grand Prix series, but Masters equivalent titles, which were tied for second in the rest of the world behind McEnroe. So both of them, obviously, 8 Grand Slams. Connors was one of only 3 players, along with three rest of the world players, along with Laver and McEnroe, with an 80% win percentage. So just that consistency of solid play over time, I think you had to include the two of them. And then Agassi also has the 3 Davis Cups, and he did win an Olympic gold, which I think I did take playing for your country in it somewhat, thinking of if it does have a prestige of, say, a Ryder Cup, because even though the European team, the Ryder Cup, isn't playing for a single country, just watching that event, they really do seem to have that pride level on the golf side. So I think Agassi's just career, he's an absolute must, and then Connors as well for really the exact same reasons Amy said. Those were my 4 and 5 as well.
So let me just pick you up on something here. We've got so far 5 picks. It seems that if I'm reading into this correctly, that you're both going to go for kind of Agassi and Connors in this slot, then that leaves us with 4 Americans and 1 Australian. Someone called out a bit of a British bias earlier. Am I within my rights to call out a US bias?
Yes.
I think that is fair, but really looking, aside from Australia, there weren't. I mean, you have a Guillermo Vilas, and I actually briefly considered putting in kind of as an alternate Gustavo Curtin. Just if the event were held on a clay court one year, I think he deserved a nod. But just looking back, really from 2005 prior, the rest of the world is really strong. I mean, the 80s was dominated by Americans. Then you had Sampras, Agassi. I think there is some bias, but I think I tried my best to be away from that. And I just think there are, like, Americans did dominate that side of tennis besides the Aussies were the really only other country that stood out.
Yeah, maybe we'll talk about kind of the lack of kind of rest of the world representation when it comes to try and get that 6th player. But the only other thing that I just want to point out at this point, Amy, is that you've got McEnroe and Connors in the same team. Is that going to cause any issues?
Knowing that Laver Cup is an exhibition, no, I don't think so. I think it'll be one of those things where, I actually covered the Laver Cup for Last Word on Tennis, the one that was in Chicago. And that was the one that Novak was at. And, there's always been this undercurrent about Federer and Djokovic. Is there this, rivalry, and they were on the court together and they played doubles together, and it was great. I don't know if people remember, but Novak actually hit Roger when they were playing doubles in the back of the head.
I think it was the lower back, actually, wasn't it?
So, in that vein, where rivals can, be on the same court, I think McEnroe and Connors could certainly play together in this event.
Cool, right. So that's 5 on 5 we've got so far. We need a 6th for both sides. We've let the European side settle down over the last couple of minutes, so let's see what craziness we're going to get now. We've got a team of Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, Lendl and Murray. We've not got the likes of Bjorn Borg. We've not got Mats Wilander. We've not got Stefan Edberg. An anti-Swedish bias, as some would say, is starting to develop here. Stan Wawrinka's not there. We've got, a few loads of other European players who haven't quite made the conversation yet. So let's kind of open it up. Let's start with Rob and see what ridiculousness is going to come now.
Quickly, I want to mention Gustavo Curtin when he won the ATP finals in Lisbon in 2000.
Of course, you want to
indoor
mention
hard.